Hi, everyone. Welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Paul Skoutelas. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Public Transportation Association. Before joining Apta in 2018, Paul served as Senior Vice President for WSP USA, one of the world's largest architectural and engineering firms, and National Director of WSP USA's Transit and Rail Technical Excellence Center. He also served as Chief Executive Officer at the Port Authority of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh and Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority in Orlando. Paul, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Pat, good hello to you, and thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about the time together. And let me commend you for this great concept. I love this, Café IBTTA. I think it's a great idea, and what a wonderful way to be able to chat with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks, and welcome again, Paul. This is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And welcome to our viewers who are members of the American Public Transportation Association, some of you who may be with us for the first time. Welcome. And today I have a nice shout out to Kathy Pennington, IBTTA's Chief Financial Officer. Kathy has been with IBTTA for more than 10 years. As CFO, she's responsible for preparing and monitoring our annual budgets, handling payroll, performing the day-to-day accounting and finance functions, working with the Finance Committee and the Investment Subcommittee, overseeing our annual financial audit, and performing a host of other duties to support the financial health of IBTTA. Kathy, thanks for all you do. Well, this is membership renewal time. We sent the membership renewal packets in late October, so you should have received your packet by now, and maybe some of you received a reminder notice earlier today. If you have any questions about membership, please contact Terry Langford. And also, please visit our 2021 membership renewal page to learn more about what IBTTA has accomplished on your behalf this year. We want to thank you for your support. Well, we are taking your questions, and we want to get started right away. Using the chat function, please select all panelists and attendees. And our question for you is this: type one word or phrase that describes your feelings about public transportation or mass transit. One word or phrase that describes your feelings about public transportation. Do that right now in the chat function using all panelists and attendees. All right. Paul, you're probably seeing some of these comments before. Critical and underfunded, spectacular, scary with COVID, important, frustrating, inefficient. Uh-oh. Hey, Paul's here. Take it easy. Struggling, crowded, inconvenient, lifeline for the working class, always reliable for me, fun, essential. This is great. Safety, able to read. Yeah, you know, when I use public transportation, I like the ability to read and do other things. Well, Paul, we'll come back to some of these comments, I think, during our discussion. But first off, you know, on the podcast On Being with Krista Tippett, she always asks her guests, tell me about your religious or spiritual upbringing. And I often ask, tell us about how you got into the industry that you're in now. How the heck did you get involved in the transit industry?
You know, it's quite interesting, Pat. You often hear people say, you know, I just ended up being in this business or this field of work, and it just kind of happened. I'm one of those strange birds, perhaps, that actually thought about exactly what I'm doing in the public transit industry, if you could believe that. It started really, I caught the bug for transportation very young. And what's most memorable in my mind is going as a middle schooler, taking the train from Philadelphia, where I grew up, to New York City as part of a class trip. And we visited the New York World's Fair. Now I'm going to give my age away here a bit, 1964. So it opened my eyes. First of all, I was in awe with the fair itself. You can imagine, right? A youngster with a class, you're excited about not only the train ride, but getting to the World's Fair. And of course, what stood out for me was the monorail. I don't know if anybody else in your audience or yourself can relate to that. It was seeing the monorail, riding the monorail. It just had me so pumped up and excited. And that carried through. I had an older cousin that was kind enough to take me along to some high school basketball playoff games, which were always held in downtown Philadelphia at what was called the Palestra, which is on the site of the University of Pennsylvania campus. And again, I can remember the excitement of getting on the train, dozens of people talking, excited about what they were going to do. And of course, for me, the train ride itself. And then moving a little more forward in terms of my experiences. This was as an undergraduate at Penn State. I studied civil engineering. That's my background. And by your junior year, you're expected to make a declaration. What area of specialty are you going to focus on? You could be a bridge designer. You could be a hydraulics major, geosciences, soil mechanics. And I was leaning really to soil mechanics. I thought that was a practical area that I thought I would enjoy. And then I took my first required transportation course. And it literally lit me up. I said, my gosh, this is what I want to do. This is the area that I want to study. And so transportation became my focus. And I continued on in graduate school with a transportation focus, especially in transportation, my master's degree. And I've worked in the transportation field for all of my career. So I am doing what I really wanted to do. And, it was the excitement of what I perceived to be about cities, about development, about moving people, what I envisioned about developing cities in a good, exciting way. And it has been my dream. And I'm a very fortunate person doing exactly what I thought would excite me.
Paul, my dad was a civil engineer, and people would often ask him, why did you choose civil engineering? And he said, well, you can pick any kind of engineering, but civil engineering is the foundation of everything. If you're going to launch a rocket to the moon, you still need civil engineers to build the launch pad. So, a lot of good civil engineers out there.
I would have liked your dad for sure.
Absolutely. And, it's a truism that there's an association for everybody. And you and I are both flying our flags today behind us. And I want you to tell our viewers a little bit about Apta and give us a sense of the size and scope of Apta and your membership.
Sure, be happy to do that, Pat. We are what I describe as a public-private partnership. We represent the public transit industry. And so our membership is comprised of the transit organizations all over the country, large and small. The largest member, of course, is the MTA in New York. And then we've got small bus systems that are in smaller communities, again, spread all over the country. And then the private sector, which are the businesses that support the industry. So these are bus manufacturers, rail car builders, equipment suppliers, engineering companies, some contractors, basically all those who provide goods and services to support the transit industry. We're about a $74 billion enterprise in terms of public transit. We employ 430,000 directly in the industry who are working as, again, drivers, mechanics, laborers and the like. And we support several million private sector jobs along the lines of what I described just a few seconds ago. Apta is about an organization of around 77 employees currently. And our main goal is to support the industry through advocacy. So we're very active on the Hill with the administration in terms of pursuing and advocating for larger investment in public transit. We are active in the education and training area for our membership. We provide technical support through a variety, dozens of committees that convene on all aspects of what transit is about. And of course, technology, which is now, a very key area for all of us. And certainly as we move into the realm of autonomous vehicles, apps for every purpose, our agencies are adapting and beginning to leverage those technologies for themselves. So And then we do all that through a whole series of in-person meetings, which is another topic I'm sure we'll touch on here, but
Yep.
in-person meetings and gatherings, because our membership really thrives on networking, sharing information, getting to know one another, exchanging stories. It's an industry that is very open and willing to provide, best experiences from one organization to the other. And our job really is to really have sound thinking, planning, and execution for the industry. That's really, in a nutshell, what Apta is about.
Paul, the way you describe Apta and your association sounds a lot like IBTTA. In fact, if you had substituted tolling for transit, it would have sounded almost identical. The kinds of things that you do, the services you offer your members, the advocacy, et cetera. It's a very important business that you're in. Paul, COVID is the issue that is dominating the news and has for the last 9 or 10 months. And certainly the transit industry has not been immune from it. You've seen in your industry big losses in ridership and revenue, and the public understandably has concerns about safety, the possibility of contracting the disease. Tell us a little bit about the transit industry's response to COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. It has been an incredible year, and we've I think all have been involved in conversations and using all these words of unprecedented, never seen before, not in our lifetime. All of those apply to what's transpired this year, 2020. When the pandemic hit, it literally really dealt a devastating blow to public transit as an industry. Our ridership went from pre-pandemic levels to transporting about 10 billion trips a year. And we saw about a 90% drop in rail ridership virtually overnight, and about a 70% drop in bus ridership. And this is average across the country. So you can imagine with those kinds of ridership declines, the fare revenue that riders pay to use the services also saw a precipitous decline. The double whammy for public transit is that it is subsidized services. We don't make a profit. Agencies depend on not only the fares that riders pay, but they also depend on subsidy, local support from all levels of government. And so with economic activity coming almost to a halt, but dramatically reduced, the prospects of seeing reduced revenues coming in from sales taxes and income taxes, property taxes was very real, has been very real for the industry. So the industry has been reeling. What's interesting is, though, it's responded incredibly well. And so what we saw almost seamlessly from the day when the pandemic hit and the shelter in place orders went in place, transit continued to function, continued to transport those essential workers to their job sites. And again, many of us, are fortunate. The nature of our jobs, as we're remote, we're working remote. But there's a large segment of the population that doesn't have that luxury. In fact, they've got to get to the grocery stores as clerks. They've got to get to the hospitals. They got to get to other services. And when you think about it, these are essential workers who, in essence, are supporting us. They're allowing us to live our lives by virtue of the jobs that they do. And so transit didn't let them down. The frontline workforce, drivers for buses and rail systems were there, putting themselves at risk at a time when, honestly, in the beginning, we didn't know what the threats exactly were with the virus, how severe this was. And so we saw that. And I think the public, by and large, the surveys that we've done following up, has really had a deeper appreciation for the value of public transit and what it means to communities. The other impact was we recognized that with such a huge blow to the finances and budgets of these agencies, that depending how long this pandemic would go, we would be in some serious trouble. And so we had worked very hard with Congress. We're very fortunate to secure $25 billion as part of the CARES Act, which was a lifeline to the agencies, has helped them keep afloat, keep operating. And we also knew that depending how long this would be continuing, this condition that we're in, that we would be back to Congress. And we have been. We're back. And currently we're working in the final days of this session, requesting an additional $32 billion for the industry. And we're hopeful that something will get done before Congress convenes and concludes in December when they go home for the holidays. So it's been a rough time, but I think what we've seen is resilience on the part of the agencies, a deeper appreciation for the value of transit. Now our work, of course, is focused on coming out of the pandemic. And just briefly to touch on that, at the same time that we were fighting for more revenue, more funding, we also established a national task force. That task force focused on a set of best practices for the industry in terms of the immediate. And I'm talking now about the cleanliness and disinfection of stations and buses and trains, so we could give people a comfort level that these measures were being taken to provide safety, not only for the frontline workforce, but for the riders themselves. And also to look at the issue of how do we change the messaging so people can develop a comfort level of what it means to ride transit and do that. So we're engaged in that now. We're certainly not there in terms of making that turn, but much of this really hinges on the economy and how quickly that we begin to open this economy back up.
This is Café IBTTA. Our guest today is Paul Skoutelas, the president and CEO of the American Public Transportation Association. And we are taking your questions. Please use the chat function and open up all panelists and attendees. And we would love to have your questions for Paul Skoutelas about transit in general, about COVID-19, about the response, anything at all. Paul, a follow-up to the question about COVID-19. You've mentioned a bunch of things, the CARES Act, your Restoration and Recovery Task Force. Tell me about something that you're especially proud of in your response, the industry as well as Apta. What are you really proud of in that response?
Yeah. I think what I'm most proud of, and this is really reinforced by the feedback that we've gotten from our membership over the past 9 months, is how quickly we as an industry, and by extension, we as Apta, an association, have responded to these issues. All of us had to go to this remote work environment. And quite frankly, we had never experienced that at Apta. We didn't know what it would mean to have 77 employees all working remotely and supporting the industry. And yet we made that transition overnight without any hiccups. That surprised me, to be honest. I thought we'd have difficulty. And we went right into a whole series of new programming, if I can call it that. We held dozens of town halls, webinars, educational sessions, information exchanges with our membership. And so I'm most proud of the fact that we never lost touch with our members, and they felt connected, even though we could not see each other, person to person or have those conversations. We did it all virtually, but by virtue of the programming that we instituted so quickly, that to me, I think was a key. It did, I believe, reinforce this notion of how important associations are, how important our association is. I'm sure in your case as well, the same, because we are the glue that keeps our industry together. They look to us to be the convener, the facilitator, the educator in many instances, sharing of information. That wouldn't happen without the services and the good work of associations like ours and the IBTTA.
Paul, I have to salute you because I really watched you closely in the early weeks of the pandemic when the lockdowns began and people started working from home, seeing your ramping up those town hall meetings and over communicating with the membership. I think you set a great example for not only the transportation industry, but all association executives. Well done.
Well, thank you, Pat. It's interesting when we look at these things, we say, what is the phrase? Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
That's
so
exactly right.
We were all pushed up against the wall here and saying, what are you going to do? And so I think all of us really have responded in such an incredible fashion in that regard.
Paul, here's a question from one of our viewers. We have seen our industry use this time to implement changes that will remain even post-pandemic. Yep. Remote work, all electronic tolling, expedited construction. Are there changes being made to public transportation that you expect to remain into the future?
That's a great question. Absolutely. There are changes happening that are taking place that will be with us for a very long time. For example, let me go back to this national task force that I mentioned. We have adopted a set of principles, practices in terms of what are the best ways to maintain the cleanliness and disinfection of our fleets, and which is very important for transit for obvious reasons. These have now been adopted. We implemented something like a good seal of housekeeping, a measure to reflect health and safety. And so we've asked transit organizations to adopt these, to sign on, that these will be the practices that they're undertaking. And we have now over 200 that have committed to these best practices. I think they will stay. They will be part of how we do business. Beyond that, part of our task force work is saying, what are we going to look like coming out of this pandemic? What are the kind of services that we offer? So there's an acceleration of things that were already underway, but now have added importance. The whole technology realm, I think, has been embraced and will continue to see advancements in this area. The development of all kinds of mobile apps for use of transit, for trip planning, for trip scheduling, for trip payments. These are things that are happening now. Autonomous vehicles are a buzz throughout the industry, the transportation industry in general. There's many, many pilot programs that are going on around the country, agencies that are testing shuttles and the like, some that have already taken it to another level. For example, in Jacksonville, the agency there known as the JTA, which may also be a member because they're a toll agency as well.
That's right.
They are doing shuttles, automated shuttles that are transporting medical materials, and they're transporting it from one location to the next without involving any employees or people, one, to safeguard, but also to showcase that the technology is advancing. We should expect, and I do fully expect, we're going to see a lot more of this coming up in the years ahead. And I think it's exciting for the industry. It's really an opportunity to be more efficient, to leverage the technology, what that allows us to do, and to keep us in the forefront of making changes that are, again, they're already underway, and we're going to see them in the coming months and years ahead.
Paul, you mentioned autonomous vehicles, and we have a question about what are your thoughts on autonomous vehicles providing transit service along active spurs, not the main line, moving forward? And maybe the person is hinting at sort of the first and last mile issues.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Those are the kinds of pilots that are underway now. There's a term for them in some camps called micromobility. It's looking at those areas that are not that efficient, for a 40-foot bus to have to travel and to provide service in, but to be used as feeders. And the first mile, last mile are great opportunities to do that. Getting back to how the industry is changing, many of our members are working directly with the so-called TNCs, the transport network companies, the Ubers and the Lyfts and the like, Vias, and looking to incorporate them where it makes sense in the provision of service delivery. So these are just some of the new delivery models, I think, that are taking shape and are definitely part of the transit future.
Paul, there's several questions here about the nature of transit, how it depends upon state and federal government for subsidies. And one question is about privatization or P3 engagement. Is this being actively pursued or deployed and implemented to support transit and return a positive ROI?
Yeah, as you look at our industry, it is dominated by public agencies with public employees operating services and such. But we also have a sector of transit management companies that are operating services directly on behalf of the public agencies, and they do that with private employees. So they're contracted to provide these services. They may not be as visible. You may look at an agency and see the services that are delivered, and you wouldn't know the difference between, is this a public operation or private operation? But in fact, many across the country on the bus side and a number of rail systems as well are privately contracted and operated. Let me just take one example. In Boston, for example, the large commuter rail operation that exists there, and it's very extensive throughout the Boston region, is privately operated under contract to the public agency. So taking full advantage of private expertise and resource to deliver that. The whole notion of public-private partnerships, P3s as we call them, they have gotten some traction in transit. Not as much as it has, for example, on the highway side, and there's a good reason for it, or the tolling side, and that is that there has to be a revenue source to pay for that. And so transit agencies, unless they have some specialized revenue stream to be able to back up a P3 arrangement, it's not going to work. However, there had been a couple high profile ones that have occurred. In Denver, Denver's now, we're about 10 years into this. The Eagle P3, as it's called, is a P3 project developed that is a commuter rail operation that connects the Denver International Airport with downtown Denver. It's a long line, about 25 miles. And it is this public-private partnership, and it's working, pretty well. In Maryland, here in our environs, we've had the Purple Line, the light rail project that is a P3. It's had some difficulties. There have been some issues there. And I think the industry is learning. The bottom line is I think there's definitely a role for public and private partnerships like this. They very much are on a case by case. It really depends on what the agency is looking to do. Does it have the wherewithal to really provide a guaranteed revenue stream? Because let's face it, the private sector brings great expertise and resource, but it's got to make money. It's got to make money at what it does. And so there has to be an assurance that they're going to get paid for the services that they provide. And I think that's where some agencies, given their financial structure, don't have that guarantee to offer. Where they do, it really becomes a viable option.
Paul, let's talk a little bit about equity in transit. The killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others, the protests, the marches have brought equity and racial justice to the forefront. Talk about the role that transit plays in community equity.
Yeah, this is no doubt a big issue today. And certainly the events of this past summer and spring, I think, brought them to the front in terms of what our individual and collective responsibilities are. As an association, given the nature of the services that we provide, which are integral to cities and the urban environment, we at Apta have always had a very active role. For example, we have a diversity and inclusion council that's been active for a number of years. And now with what's transpired, they've been given the charge to develop an action plan around just the issues that you're speaking to. But I think for us in transit and what we are communicating and talking about with our members is equity comes in different dimensions. Equity is what services are we offering in transit? Where are they going within our communities, the buses and the trains? What investments are we making in new systems and lines? Are we doing that with a look to equity, how we will serve the public? And a good portion of our ridership across the country is very dependent on transit. The economic means are such that transit is their lifeline, is their lifeblood. And so what's happening is that more and more agencies are coming to the realization that they really need to listen to communities, think about their investments, where they're operating services, where they're going to put the additional dollar of investment for a new line, with a look to, is this equitable? How does it serve the public? Or does it meet the social needs and demands that we're constructing? So it's a new awareness that it goes far above where we've been. And I believe it's going to transcend not only the transit side, but everything that we do in transportation as public municipal entities, as governments, as associations like us are really thinking more about this broader picture. So I think there's a role for all of us to play to be a catalyst in this area. And that's how we view the APTA role. We're a catalyst to bring our members together, bring some of these more difficult issues to the table that oftentimes don't get discussed, but put them in full view and have some honest conversation around them.
Paul, I'm going to make a brief pause here to make a few announcements, and then I'll come back to you for some final thoughts. Next week, our guest on Café IBTTA will be Trish Hendren, Executive Director of the Eastern Transportation Coalition, formerly known as the I-95 Corridor Coalition. Other upcoming programs include on December 14th, the Young Professionals Presents, Meet the IBTTA Leaders, Get Involved, Make a Difference. This session is about all the things you wanted to know about IBTTA, but were afraid to ask. And I think about what you said at the outset, Paul, about APTA, all of the different services that you provide. This is a session for IBTTA members about what IBTTA does. On December 16th, our task force on diversity, social, and racial inclusion hosts its second book discussion on how to be an anti-racist by Ibram Kendi. Check out the IBTTA website for further details on all of our events. Paul, what final words of wisdom do you have before we sign off today?
Well, Pat, thank you again for having me on the program here in the session with you. I don't know that I would characterize them the words of wisdom, but perhaps I'll give this offering, and that is I think that what we've witnessed in 2020 has been indescribable in so many ways. And many of us, of course, are anxious, eager to turn the calendar. Let's now start counting 2021 and look to a better year ahead. But I think it really does speak to the opportunity that we have, given the leadership positions that you and I hold in our associations, the leadership of the organizations that comprise our membership. These are the moments that call for innovation, new ideas. And I think it's an exciting time to be in the business of transportation, whatever that might be, whether it's tolling or highways or public transit or high-speed rail, for example. I think this is an exciting time for us. And I, for one, feel privileged to be in the industry that we're in, to be challenged by what's in front of us. I believe we can make a difference and take advantage of these changes that are happening to reposition our organizations and our industries in every bit more a positive manner than they've been in the past. And so I'm excited by it. I think we've got great opportunities ahead.
Paul, I'm excited by it as well. You know, you said earlier, necessity is the mother of invention, and these times have caused all of us to think in new and creative ways. Paul, it has been an absolute pleasure having you with us on the show today. I want to thank you again. And thanks to the IBTTA members. Be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Pat. Really appreciate it being on your show. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.